after. It's going to help bolster the Supreme Court when they assess the merits of the May 6th case.
Well, I think that's true in this sense. I was surprised at the attention that my case got, and particularly the response from the public and the editorials across the country, which almost universally
thought it was a good thing.
Asked the government to recognize this as their opportunity to finally start doing the right thing on pot, and assuming we're successful with our appeal, and we could get a decision, literally any day on that. I think if we get a similar positive spin and the public continues to support what the judiciary is doing, I think it may embolden the Supreme Court to do the right thing in your case. Yeah,
I think so too. At least certainly we're hoping. Charming little building, that Supreme Court, isn't it? There's only room for like about 40, 50 spectators in there, and it's got the building itself is massive. It takes up a huge block. And
well, they figure by televising it, they can keep it small.
Yeah, well, you might be right. There's a huge scrum area out there too for all the assembled media, but the courtroom itself is quite a hallowed little thing, and I'm looking forward to that. Anything else you'd like to add about your cases or your client, or what we should do in anticipation of the verdict coming up?
Well, I think it's an exciting time in the sense that I think that we're on the cusp of finally changing things, changing long-standing bad law, and by the same token, I want to be cautious in terms of what people take from this. For example, the law in Ontario may be applied differently in other provinces. Other judges in other provinces are not required to follow what's going on in Ontario. In addition, stuff like trafficking and growing pot is still, this doesn't affect the viability of those prosecutions. So people should be cautious in terms of what they take from this, and although I'm confident of succeeding on this,
you got to figure though,
other appeal. Sorry?
If pot's legal to possess, it would have to be legal to sell and grow, because there's no other anomaly in the criminal code that would make something illegal to own but illegal to sell.
Well, that's not exactly true. There's certain activities that receive, for example, under the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, there's some controlled substances that are legal to possess but not to sell. There's some that are legal to possess and sell but not import or export. So I don't think the courts have necessarily said that
you
have those kinds of distinctions. I mean, I recognize it can make it unworkable.
Well, it comes down to access again, as you said with medical.
You still have to address that issue. As long as there's no legal source of pot, and we have people who need it legitimately for medical purposes, at some point you're going to have to recognize the need for people to grow it and to sell it, because the government refuses to make a legal source available.
Well, here's something that one of the Supreme Court justices asked in the adjournment back in December about the case with Momo, Levine, Kane, and Clay. He said, here you are proposing negligent penalties for the possession of marijuana. He said, at the same time, asking for this extremely punishing threshold to sell the very same marijuana. He said, does that make sense to you, that something could be worth a $100 fine and something to sell the very same thing could net 10 years in jail?
That's right. And although I think that the theoretical penalties and the practical penalties will likely be quite divergent, in the sense that, in fact, right after the Parker decision, and the Parker decision in Ontario was significant not just because of the fact that it struck down the prohibition on pot, but for what it said about pot and just how dangerous or not dangerous it is.
Mm-hmm.
And from that, a lot of our lawyers started arguing, we've got to readdress the way we address penalties for this, because the courts are now telling us it's just not that dangerous. So why are we, it used to be that simple possession invariably, 20 years ago, resulted in jail sentences. We've gotten beyond that, and now we're at the point where trafficking or growing it also doesn't necessarily result in a jail sentence. So I think the courts, given the findings about the lack of real danger of using small amounts of pot,
and yet all the time they're trying to increase the penalties on growers, these police associations and politics.
And that's where the government's being pretty short-sighted. I mean, as long as the government creates a black market, there's going to be these grow operations, and you know, the government can easily address that by legalizing it. And I mean, the Senate has recommended the approach recommended by the Senate, which is legalization and essentially government distribution.